Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Barnyard Broadcast. My name is Maddie Horkler, and I am your host. Today, I'm very excited to welcome onto the podcast Miss Alli Jobe. Alli Jobe has recently finished up her master's degree at Penn State, so she's going to dive a little bit deeper into the beef cattle research that she did there, as well as describe her vision for the future of her position. I'm very excited to have Alli on the podcast today, so without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Hello and welcome back to the Barnyard Broadcast. We got a very exciting episode today. Really excited to introduce our guest here, Miss Alli Jobe. We'll go ahead and let her introduce herself. So, Alli, you want to take it away?
Hi, yeah, thanks Maddie for having me on today. I'm really excited to be here. As she said, my name's Alli Jobe. I actually just started a position here at Penn State. Official title is Assistant Professor of Beef Production. So I'll be doing some extension and some teaching and assisting on the research side here in the all things beef at the university. I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania originally, where my family raised Angus and commercial cattle on a small cow-calf operation there. And I really enjoyed the lifestyle and how I was raised. I knew I wanted to do 4-H and be involved with animals and livestock just a little bit more. And so I joined 4-H, and my sister and I showed livestock pretty competitively across the state and across the country. And we spent a lot of time with mom and dad traveling to shows and sales. And so that really kind of lit a passion in me for the livestock industry. And I knew I wanted to get some more schooling and go to college to focus on animal sciences. And so I did that at Penn State, where I was involved in a lot of clubs, Block and Bridle, Collegiate Cattlewomen's, and then was a member of the 2023 Livestock Judging team. And again, some of those experiences I had at Penn State just really solidified and pushed that passion along even further. And I started to think about maybe grad school opportunities. And it just so happened that Penn State around that time had some funding come open for a graduate student to do research and also help coach the livestock judging team here at Penn State. And so when I was offered that position, I took the opportunity to get more education, do some research in beef cattle production and management, and also work with students and teach and coach that livestock judging team. And so it's been a really fun last 6 years, advancing my education and again, kind of facilitating and that passion that I had from such a young age. So it's been really fun, and I'm excited to be here full time now as an employee.
Yeah, I mean, great story, very similar to, what I have experienced. So it's
Right.
it's really great. Actually, Alli and I go back a little far, so we're really excited to have Alli Jobe here on the livestock team. So we have a really exciting announcement later, but for now, let's just go ahead and talk about some of those experiences in things that you were referencing there in your introduction. So I think we could start probably where it began at your master's project. So if you want to go ahead and just give us the background of that, or maybe some goals that you had going into that project. So if we want to start
Yeah.
with that.
Absolutely. So like I said, I was really excited to get my master's degree. And from my background and where I grew up, and what we were doing there on the cow-calf side of things is really where my heart was at. And I was so thankful, working with Dr. Felix, that she was able to help me brainstorm some ideas on a project that would kind of fit my needs and my interests and my wants when it came to really creating a grad program that best suited me. So with that, started thinking about some of the big ideas in the beef industry. So for folks who may be listening that aren't quite as familiar with the beef industry and the supply chain, it's pretty segregated and disconnected in a little bit in some ways, but it all kind of starts at the beginning with that cow-calf herd. And so producers there can really focus on the genetics and focus on creating cattle that best fit their environments. And what they can do then is either sell those calves when they wean them at about 6 months old. They can send them to a backgrounder or a stalker operation, get some cheaper gains on those cattle with a high forage diet. Or they can keep those cattle after weaning, typically heifers, and use them as replacement females within the herd. And so, as cows kind of start to get older, less productive, those younger generations can start to fill that need there in the cow herd. But at some point, those calves that are sold at weaning, will be sent to a feedlot to be finished on either high concentrate diet to get some additional energy and fat and marbling deposited there in the cattle to really create a carcass that's valuable. And once they are harvested, those products eventually end up on the dinner table. And so, again, just wanted to kind of give some. We started thinking about how the beef industry is broke down, and how a lot of those decisions are made in terms of genetics way at the beginning, but they have to then travel those cattle through a pretty diverse supply chain there. We also were discussing the importance of that cow-calf sector, especially when it comes to efficiency. And so, when you think about efficiency, usually people consider the inputs as a ratio to outputs. And so, to increase efficiency, you want to decrease the amount of resources, time, money you're putting on or putting in on the front side versus what you're getting out on the back side. And so we always want our inputs to be lower than our outputs. And a lot of this can come from feed costs. And so a lot of research has suggested that 40 to 70% of annual production costs come from feed. And this is really important when we're starting to think about the beef cow herd, because 72% of energy fed within the entire supply chain. So going back to thinking about those weaned calves in a stalker environment or fed cattle in a feedlot, 72% of all of it is actually fed just to maintain cows in the cow herd. And so it starts to be just a little bit more of a quote unquote inefficient system, or even an area that really needs to be heavily focused on due to that really high input factor there. There's ways to measure efficiency when you're thinking about the amount of feed that's fed, and the amount of gain or weight that is produced then. And that's a really good feed to gain conversion and really useful in feedlot environments. But it starts to be pretty tricky to think about that in a cow-calf setting, or even some of those stalker operations and backgrounding operations where cattle are grazing. Just because to pull cattle in takes a lot of time to get weights on, takes a lot of time and energy to try and understand the actual intakes of those cattle when they're out grazing. And so it becomes challenging to really think about efficiency in the cow herd. And that's what led us to my project, that was actually titled Factors Impacting Efficiency Within the Beef Cow Calf Herd. Again, when we started thinking about the literature and some factors that can impact cow efficiency, milk production's one that always kind of crosses producers' minds, and it crossed our mind too when we were thinking about this project. Heavier cows usually produce more milk. Multiple researchers have suggested that, and so those heavier cows, if we can supply them enough nutrients to kind of meet that milking potential, there's an opportunity to wean off heavier calves. And again, kind of balancing that input to output. There's also a consideration when it comes to mature cow weight and the NASM and those NRCs and things that really focus on, or resources that focus on nutrition. They suggest that a pretty good rule of thumb is that cows will consume about 2% of their body weight in dry matter intake. And so, again, when we increase that amount or that mature cow size, we're going to increase the amount of feed that's required to meet that 2%. And so, when we increase cow size, full studies, one specifically out of Oklahoma, had said that a 30% increase in cow size could actually increase her dry matter needs by about 22 to 28%. And so, again, when we're increasing that dry matter intake, we're increasing the feed costs, whether that's the producer buying in additional feedstuffs, whether it's taking the time and energy to produce more feedstuffs on their own home farm. There's a cost associated with that. And so another Oklahoma study suggested there's a potential to increase those costs by about 10% when we increase mature cow weight by about 100 or 90 kilograms there. And so there's a lot of things when we're thinking about nutrition that are at play. But one of the big things that affects nutrition is actually the weather. Same with cattle performance, but weather will impact the availability, the quality of forages, and again, I mentioned it before in that supply chain, but the cow-calf herd is really unique and is really hands-off because we just producers love to let those cattle just graze and eat the forage that's available to them off pasture. And that's kind of the beauty of it in my mind, and what a lot of producers enjoy about producing cattle in that segment is because there's not a whole lot of labor that goes into it at times, and those cattle can harvest the forage themselves. And so 2/3 of all of the forage that is required by those cattle are typically gained from pastures. And so again, when the weather is hot, when it's dry, when it's rainy, when it's what have you, that really has an impact on the quality of the forage and the availability. And so efficiency was really the goal of my research project. And we also looked at some of the ways that producers can manipulate and change and potentially impact those areas that I had just discussed. And one of the big things we were interested in at looking at was EPDs, or estimated progeny differences. And so producers can use these tools, typically reported by a breed association if they're working with purebred cattle, or some other genetic companies like Neogen and what have you that phenotype these cattle. But the goal is to get that genetic data back and understand how those traits will be passed on through the herd. And so we looked at terminal traits, we looked at growth production traits, and then we also looked at some maternal management type traits as the American Angus Association breaks it down, or breaks those EPDs down. And so producers have historically focused on looking at or selecting for more growth than terminal traits, mostly because they're very heritable. And so they're passed down very easily. There's a lot of opportunity to increase the amount of sellable weight and product for those producers. But we were also curious, and some folks would argue, both in the academia, but then also as producers, that cows need to be able to have a calf each year that is healthy and grows big. And then she needs to be able to do that for multiple years to really maximize her time in the cow herd and that return on investment. And so that's where some more of those maternal and management traits are of interest to producers. But the challenge with those is that they're less heritable. And so when we think about back fat, for example, that's has a heritability of about 44%, where we start thinking about heifer pregnancy rates, that's closer to about 5%. And so there's a balancing act that producers have to play, and then kind of where they're making their money and their goals of their operation are really going to impact how they select those traits and where they're going to put emphasis and pressure. In the cow-calf herd, producers have the opportunity to kind of calculate efficiency in a few different ways. And one of the ways that a lot of producers, if they have the opportunity to take weights and know how those cows and calves are gaining, they can use ratios that focus on calf weaning weight, but then also cow weight, and kind of understand how much weight that cow's weaning off in a calf each year. And so that was a lot of information that I kind of spilled out there. But a lot of those considerations that I mentioned are what really drove kind of the focus of our project, which I can elaborate more on here in a second. But yeah, efficiency in the cow herd and what we can look at to really drive some of those or change and manipulate some of those factors that do impact it.
Yeah, and so it's really cool to hear about, the thought process and all those things that go into it. Because like you said, the cow-calf sector and just the beef sector in general is very dynamic and
Hmm.
different for each producer. So
Right.
when listening to your research, it just comes to mind for you, what is a main takeaway, I guess, from all those considerations in your hard work in the outcomes of your project? For the beef producers that are listening, they might think, how is this, how do I take that and apply it to my operation regardless of my environment? I mean, would you like to elaborate just a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. And so to kind of start answering some of those questions that I had mentioned before and what you had suggested and brought up there, we actually had available to us from the Penn State Beef and Sheep Center 32 years worth of herd data. And so records that were collected in terms of calf growth and weights, as well as some management traits on those cows like body condition score, mature cow weight, hip height, things like that. A lot of raw records over those 32 years we had available to us. And so that was kind of the direction we took. We wanted to see if we could answer some of those questions we had in terms of efficiency in the cow herd with that data. And so when we started to analyze it and better understand kind of how things have changed over time within that herd specifically, or the Angus cattle here at campus, we were curious to see how maybe pelvic height, pelvic width was impacted. We were curious to see how yearling hip height and yearling weights were impacted, and then how some of that data when those heifers were retained within that cow herd, how some of that translated into her mature cow weight, her mature cow hip height, her cow body condition score at weaning, and even her calving ease score whenever she calved within the herd. One of the things that we saw within the data was that calving ease score not as correlated as we had thought. There could potentially be a higher correlation, but it wasn't as correlated as we had thought to pelvic width and pelvic height. And so that's a routine procedure or measurement that a lot of cow-calf producers can and will take on their heifers if they pull them in to kind of get an idea of that pelvic area, right? And so when we kind of start looking at pelvic area, it gives us a prediction, hopefully, on calving ease and how wide that pelvic area is for those calves to pass through. When we kind of saw that wasn't as correlated as we thought, maybe I started digging into some literature, and there's some other research that suggests maybe this could be a more useful tool at predicting puberty in heifers. So rather than thinking about it as a calving ease tool, are we able to use it to identify earlier maturing heifers within our herd? So heifers that are going to come into heat earlier, heifers that we can get bred earlier, and then heifers that are going to give us a calf sooner than maybe some of our counterparts. And so I thought that was a really useful tool that maybe I know I had the preconceived notion that, oh, this is a great metric for calving ease. Maybe there's another direction we can take it. It's rather than dignifying it as unuseful, I think there's absolutely some validity to it when we're thinking about replacement heifers and maturity in our replacement heifers. So that was a really interesting correlation in those traits that I saw. Another one was that cow body condition score was significantly correlated to calving ease, as well as calving ease and cow weight. And so what those trends kind of indicated was that cows that were lighter actually had a higher calving ease score. And I do contribute that probably to the idea that cow weight and body condition score were pretty correlated in this data set as well. And so those heavier cows tended to be just heavier in terms of their condition. There's kind of that old wives' tale, if you will, in the beef industry that over-conditioned cows have a pretty hard time calving. And so again, I started to kind of look into some more of that literature. A lot of previous research kind of suggested an ideal body condition score at calvings about 4 to 6. And so again, those correlations that we were seeing weren't as dramatic as we had thought they could potentially be. And when I looked at the average over the 32 years for body condition score on our cows at Penn State, they were about a 6. And so kind of in that ideal range. And so with that in mind, it makes sense that there wasn't a lot of calving difficulties, and that herd averaged a calving ease score of 1. And so on a scale of 1 to 4, 1's no assistance, 4 is a cesarean section. So our cows have been very ideal in terms of their calving ease as well as their body condition at calving. And so we didn't see a whole lot of changes or wow factors in our data set, but again, a data that just kind of solidified the conversations that producers are having on farm all the time. Another area that I was interested in was some of the trait selection pressures in those EPDs that the management at Beef Sheep was kind of targeting. And so Previous research data has shown that calves that are heavier as year or at birth are heavier at weaning and then are heavier as yearlings. And that same data suggests that cows that are heavier tend to produce heavier calves. And so I was interested to see if potentially we have changed the cow size and if that has changed progeny growth performance in terms of weight gain, and then if that weight gain was changed and manipulated over time in those calves the whole way from birth to yearlings. Again, when we were looking at some of those EPD trends within our herd, Penn State did do a very good job in recent years of decreasing cow weight as well as cow hip height. And so we weren't just decreasing the amount of or the weight of those cattle, but we were actually decreasing skeletal size as well. When we were looking at the EPDs within the Penn State herd, over the last about 10 years, our EPDs for both mature weight and mature height were below breed average very consistently and at a pretty significant rate as well. And when we started looking at some of the trends and how that related into the calf growth then, and some of that intentional moderation of our cow herd, how that impacted calf growth performance. When I started looking at birth weights within the calves, again, Penn State did a very good job of selecting for decreased birth weights. Initially, we were above breed average when it came to the actual phenotypic birth weight of these calves, but in the last 3 years, we've better aligned with breed average. And then those selection pressures within the herd, again, signify that there was intentional reduction in birth weight. And going back to that calving ease conversation, I can't tell you the exact reason why, but birth weight is one of those factors that can impact calving ease. And so bigger calves at birth at that time of parturition can have a little bit more challenge coming through that pelvic area and increased chances of dystocia. And so that could absolutely be a reason why we've decreased over time. When we start thinking about weaning weights, then this is actually one of my favorite figures and favorite data that I got to play with because over time, the Penn State weaning weights were above breed average, and so was the selection pressure placed on the EPDs. It wasn't until about the last 5 years that there was less emphasis placed on those weaning weights and those EPDs, and then our weaning weights within the herd better aligned with breed averages. So they didn't drop below, but they were not above. They were right on with breed average. But I say this is my favorite data to play with because it kind of solidifies the conundrum we see all the time in the cow-calf herd. Both Penn State and the national Angus herd put a lot of pressure to increase the weaning weight EPD. And so from 1992 to 2024, the EPDs within the national Angus herd actually increased from about 20 to 75. And so that's a pretty significant jump. And when we look at the phenotypes or the actual weaning weights that we're recording within our national cow herd or Angus herd, as well as the Penn State herd, our EPDs or our weaning weights are very stagnant and plateaued, if you will. So from 1992 to 2024, our weaning weights only increased by about 30 kilograms. And so in today's market, 30 kilograms is going to be a lot of money in the producer's pocket. But when we're thinking in the grand scheme of things, we have significantly increased our EPDs and our genetics when we're thinking about weaning weights, but there's something in the environment and on the calf side that's limiting those calves to really reach that genetic potential because we're looking at a graph that is at about a 45-degree angle in terms of increase versus a line that's about 90 degrees and pretty flat. That's really interesting to me. And there's been some conversation amongst academics suggesting that maybe we've kind of maxed out the genetic potential in weaning weight. And if we're kind of maxing out our outputs, our focus should start to shift to our inputs, right? And that's going to be the cows. And so, again, another really interesting conversation piece that lots of folks have been in academia have been chatting about. If I had to say, in terms of just raw data, Those are some of the areas in both the cow and the calf that were interesting to me. But at the end of the research project, and what I was talking about earlier was efficiency, right? Overall herd efficiency and how changes in cows and calves impacted that. The data that we were looking at and analyzing showed some increases in that efficiency over time. And so the efficiency ratio that we used was calf weaning weight divided by the cow weight at weaning and multiplying it by 100 to give us that idea of a percentage of weight weaned off in a calf each year. And so over the 32 years, the Penn State data showed that there was a 44% efficiency ratio, and so cows averaged or weaned off a calf each year at about 44% of her own body weight. And that really fits into some of the data that's already out there. A study out of Michigan, and that most closely resembles our environment here in the Northeast, cool season grasses, lots of forage opportunities. They reported about a 45% efficiency ratio. And so to see our cattle within Penn State's herd kind of mirroring that is exciting to me, just knowing that we're doing a nice job relative to herds in similar systems. And again, we saw an increase in this efficiency over time, specifically within those last 2 or 10 years, where we were decreasing and moderating cow size and also maintaining our weaning weights. And so again, really playing to our advantage that input to output ratio, decreasing cow size and the amount of feed and energy it requires to maintain her, but then also keeping weaning weights high enough that we can be profitable and get some return on our investments. We also were interested to see or how the efficiency ratio looked when we plotted it against dam weight. And our data showed that an increase in dam weight tended to decrease a cow's efficiency ratio. And so when cows were heavier, they weaned off a lighter calf, or at least a calf that was a lesser percentage of her body weight. It just solidified some other data that was out there and in drastically different environments. Research out of Wyoming demonstrated that smaller cows tended to have about a 10% increase in their efficiency when compared to their larger counterparts. And then throughout the Midwest and some of those central plains, again, they suggested that smaller cows had a better time or a easier time weaning off those calves and having a higher efficiency. And so nothing groundbreaking, I would say, in our data, other than it really suggests some of those ideas that are out there and supports it for producers here in the Northeast, that management and production in the Penn State system has increased efficiency, and hopefully we can translate some of those ideas to our Northeast producers here in PA. So again, bringing it all back together and then looking at whole herd efficiency was a really important part of this project as well.
It sounds like you had a really good like case study there at Beef Sheep, and it was valuable in supplying you with information to take to producers to help them on their farms, specifically here in the Northeast, but also, in other situations. So when we think about your research and the things that you learned, but then we also think about the future and of your new position that you just accepted here at Penn State, how are you going to take that knowledge and those experiences you had during graduate school and put them into work in your new position?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm really excited, again, to take some of these and put it into practice when it comes to extension programming. And so earlier when I mentioned my new position, I'm housed on at University Park as an assistant professor in beef production. And so I have a 50-50 split between extension and teaching. And so my extension programming, I'm really excited to kind of complement our current beef specialist, Dr. Felix, here, where she's got a lot of formal training in ruminant nutrition and really likes the feedlot nutrition. Potentially, I can help complement that and facilitate some more cow-calf programming in the for the beef cattle producers here in PA. So My extension interests and kind of where I want to pull some of the research and the things that I learned through grad program is going to be through the field days and the meetings and the things that we already do and focus on that production system there, specifically nutrition. Again, Dr. Felix is a nutritionist by training, and she was my advisor here. And so I learned a lot of really cool things about basic nutrition that I'd love to have conversations about when we're thinking about the cow-calf sector specifically. Again, my research was very focused on trait selection pressures, and so incorporating some genetics and those conversations in programming as well is going to be important to me. And then also how that nutrition and those genetics kind of intermix and interact with one another, and how can we optimize both of them to have an efficient system. Again, cow management was a big conversation piece when we talked about body condition score and hip heights and how those phenotypic traits were all related to one another. And so cow management, but then also heifer development and how we can manage our heifers with both nutrition, but then also some of those other ideas when it comes to pelvic area and maturity and getting them bred and getting them productive sooner. How does that heifer development system kind of look, and how can I facilitate producers there? So again, really want to focus on the females and the cows and that system there. But when we think about my other part, or the other part of my job in teaching, one of the big responsibilities there is coaching the livestock judging team. And so from my experience on the team as a team member, but then also acting as the assistant coach while I was in grad school, I've really enjoyed talking about structural correctness, body composition, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to help develop those skills with producers so they can understand how those kind of phenotypic traits contribute to cow longevity. So that time the cow can will last in the herd. But then also when we're thinking about fed progeny and our fat cattle and what we're sending to harvest, carcass quality and how some of those traits translate into a good quality carcass and those yields and quality grades that we're looking for as producers. And so I think that would be a really neat area that Dr. Felix and I have kind of dabbled in the past. And so here's a plug for the beef short course for producers who are interested. That's a program hosted in October where I get to dabble in that a little bit. But again, an area that I think could be expanded, and even a conversation piece when I go on farm calls to work with producers, that could absolutely come up. And I'm really excited to work with the team as a whole, just because working with the beef team and talking about some of their interests, there's a lot of overlap and conversation when it comes to new technologies and kind of potentially where those could fit in for producers. And so virtual fencing and virtual grazing opportunities, digital record keeping systems, cameras and video monitoring, and other precision kind of livestock management tools that efficient in terms of labor, but also feasible in terms of cost. Because I think we all share a very similar insight and perspective on technology, that there's a lot of really interesting developments coming out of this field, but they also need to be practical and have on-farm application and be reasonably priced for the producer to be able to implement them. And so having those conversations as there's a lot more development coming out of that field, I think is going to be really fun to have with the beef team and then also producers. Like I said, to answer your question, I'm just really excited to focus on some of those areas when it comes to extension. And then hopefully pull some of those ideas from my role as a professor and the livestock judging team coach, and seeing a really nice marriage between it all. I think it's going to be my biggest goal.
Yeah, I know we're really excited to have you on the team. I'm really excited to have you on the team. And the one thing we were saving here till the end was also to bring about that Alli is also going to be a host on the podcast with me. So it won't just be me flying solo anymore. So I'm really excited to have her and her expertise on the cattle to help complement, some of my experiences with the sheep, with our guests and all of that. So I'm really excited. Also, yeah, the beef cattle short course, I will also be there so you can come and meet the entire crew. But it's going to be a great addition. I think you're going to be a great addition. I think it's going to be really fun looking forward. So, as we close up this episode today, is there any last thought that you have for the producers or just in general for the listeners and students, whoever may be listening? Just some lasting thoughts and impressions about either your new position or your old position as a graduate student.
Yeah, no, I kind of ended your or my answer to your last question with my goal is going to be kind of searching out that marriage between all of the things that I've been tasked with. When it comes to extension programming, I absolutely have my interests that I think will be a nice complement to what's already going on. But at the end of the day, my extension goal is to serve the producers. And so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't meet these producers, survey them, ask them questions, see what issues or interests are out there and an everyday conversation for them. And then how can I provide some either research or knowledge or programming to solidify that. And so the balance between producer needs, but then also my interests on the extension side is going to be another goal as well. Back to the marriage of my teaching from my experiences in undergrad, from my experiences in grad school, my number one goal when it comes to developing students is going to make them well-rounded, critical thinkers that have an analytical side to them that can also communicate well and be a true leader in the industry. And I know that kind of sounds like potentially a really big goal with all of those big words. But at the end of the day, I think giving those students opportunities through the livestock judging team, opportunities through undergrad research, opportunities to just go experience new things and push them out of their comfort zone is going to be the biggest thing for me. And I won't be able to do that unless I'm forward facing with the 4-H educators, the other livestock judging 4-H teams in the state, and even those kids who are showing livestock and maybe even not involved in livestock judging yet. But I think you're only as progressive and as influential as the support system that you kind of build around yourself. And so I think building that, again, I keep using the word marriage, but between my extension and between my teaching, I think is ultimately going to create that support system, that backing, that essentially culture that I really want to create in this position. And so, again, balancing producers, students, other faculty members in the department here, as well as the youth who are coming up and thinking about agriculture as a career. I think all of those need to be considered in the dynamic role that I'm in. And so, again, just really looking forward to dipping my toes in a lot of different areas to hopefully just create and continue to progress the really unique livestock industry we have going on here in PA.
Well, I say we ended on that note because that sounds great. So, again, we're really happy to have Alli Jobe here, and keep a listen out for the rest of our episodes with both of us. So,
Yep, looking
um,
forward to being a host and having some good conversation with Maddie and our guests.
I hope you all enjoyed that episode as much as I did. As previously mentioned, Alli and I will now co-host the Barnyard Broadcast. So if you liked all that chatter, don't worry, there's a lot more where that came from. If you would like some more information, check out the show notes for linked articles as well as the Beef Cattle Short Course, and you can also find more information about beef cattle and livestock in general by asking your local livestock educator or visiting the Penn State Extension website at extension.psu.edu. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.